I started out as an advertising writer, and because it just seemed like the funnest place to write. To have fun with language, to have fun with turn of phrase, to have, to be out visible. It was advertising was just sort of booming. This is the mid '80s, so I wanted to write. I didn't want to be a journalist, so it was sort of somewhere in that space. And one of the things I like doing, two things I like doing, strangely enough, I liked writing in Hindi as well as English, and I like doing TV commercials. And it was very early days, especially with the exception of Lintas, there weren't very many agencies that were actually focused on doing that were good with video. I mean, with TV commercials and the audiovisual medium, which was mostly shot on film actually those days. And in the agency I started working in Delhi, there was pretty much no one else who actually thought film. So I got to write, I got to go and work with producers in Bombay, because those days we did scratch films or scratch tracks in Delhi, but we went to produce in Bombay. It was not legit, there was no legit TV commercial filmmaker in Delhi, and in a sense there still isn't. They still take the primary business is still in Bombay. So one of the nice things was that you got to sort of co-direct with a producer, director, whatever. Whereas they actually dealt with all the production stuff, and and they were used to doing that. So you sort of learned. Early days, because we used to have to battle to go for shoots, which was really bizarre. Until I almost went on dharna saying, I cannot write if I cannot go see what is produced. If I can write anything, I can write a Star Trek, script, but can we produce it? I have no clue. Until I go and work and see the machines and see what's possible, talk to people, it's unfathomable. So it used to be fun, so you learnt some of the thing. And when I started working in advertising, I think part of me felt that somehow there was some sense that I always wanted to do documentary. But it was some sense that also that the documentary we see by and large was supremely boring. I mean, you have to remember, I'm still that generation that grew up with state FD stuff being shown before every cinema that you went to see, every fiction film you went to see. Whether it was a Jerry Lewis or it was a Amar Akbar Anthony or whatever the hell it was, you still had to see. But I'm so grateful for them, because I don't think I would have had a sense of what international leaders were like. You had all of this stuff. Of course, you endlessly saw Indira Gandhi with whoever, but you saw her with 100 other leaders who would all have been unreal to you, because you never, there was no television, there was no other way for you to have a visual sense of the world. So, but there was a sense that, okay, that is the kind of documentary I don't think I want to make, but I didn't have a clue about what I meant by that. So I thought, acha, let's do advertising, and along the way, hopefully one would learn better communication skills, and someday I'll come back to documentary. And this is the early 90s, by now the economy is globalizing, there's all kind of corporate deals coming in. The independent small creative shop was vanishing as an advertising agency. They were always tied up. I mean, the first agency I worked with had a global tie-up, but it never impinged our lives. We had no sense of it, except we used to get a collection of their great work once a year. And it was like, great, okay, we get to see stuff, There was no internet, so it was great to see their guard book, as it was called. So, but the thing is that at some point it just became too much to just keep doing that. And it so happened that my partner was sort of toying with the idea of doing a film on looking at precisely that, what the liberalized market meant, right? In a more grounded sense, that is there something called a free market? Can it exist outside of the society in which it's operating, right? And for me, I think that was the best kind of question to be asking at that point. It just so happened that that was happening. We then ended up making this film called Meals Ready, which was looking at the business of growing rice. So we took really a basic grain that you can pretty much trace across the country, located in Tamil Nadu, because there was a lot of research in Tamil Nadu that you could place what you were seeing and understanding in context of, and really looked at how socially embedded markets are. That the whole notion of a free market is basically, it's mythology, right? Your negotiating power in the market is different if you are of a certain caste, if you have political connections, if your family has a long history of philanthropy, philanthropy in quotes, if you are of a certain gender, I mean, all of this, right? So, and it was fascinating. we were a very eclectic team of people working, popular television, classic documentary, research background, advertising. I mean, that it was like the weirdest motley collection of people in that could come together. But I think that's what brought a different energy to it, that we were pushed to, and had a subject like rice growing. It is not visually a subject that is something that leaps out at you. Yeah, and it was in a small town, which is not the world's most exciting place. Honestly, if you just stop, you would at the most stop to get a coffee and keep driving towards Kanchipuram from Madras. You would not even register Walajabad as a real place because there's nothing in it really. But as you spend time in a place starts revealing itself to you, And it's not because your eyes are peeled and you're constantly saying, Achha, can I get a shot here and can I get a shot there? There's a difference. There's a difference that you start seeing people. And and I think that shows in some work, when you spend time embedded in a place, when people get to that point of comfort with you, when you get to that point of understanding what they're not saying, right? When the market becomes something more than, oh, this is a colorful thing and there is mirrors there and there is buckets here and there is fabric in that market and there is vegetables there, and they're not just visual elements, although they may manifest themselves as such in your film, but actually you get to something else. There's a sculptor behind 3 lanes behind the crematorium. So when you're trying to tease out what is the local economy, it starts coming to you. And for me, that was a great experience. It was 3-4 months. It was a totally different way of working. 3-4 months of living in Madras, 4-5 months, I can't remember. Living in and out of Madras, where I had never lived before. Supposedly a culture I'm supposed to belong to, but that I knew nothing of. An agricultural economy, which I didn't know how to articulate questions, even in Hindi or English, and I was doing it in Tamil. But so you're pushing yourself to a certain limit of trying to understand how things work. And then trying to take that material and make other sense of it, then to collate it as a film. I mean, so in that sense, it's a really important moment of what the questions that were troubling you in one way, manifesting themselves another way, and then you're saying, okay, this is sort of a direction which my life can go. But it was also a lesson in how impossible it is for documentary to be funded, and how it's just an insane kind of world and not a particularly sustainable one. But I was still freelancing advertising at that time, so it was okay. And so that's how I actually started making documentary. The first film actually, ironically, it's like I've slid down the scale on money, like that, like plummeted nose down. The first film was finally, we approached them finally for co-funding, which was the Oxford University, which had spent a lot of money doing a lot of the research in Tamil Nadu on pretty much rice, on the politics of rice growing. And as, and some of our other funding fell through. So we were like, we don't know how we're going to make it. And they had said they'll put in part of the money. And then finally they said, you know what, we will fund you. Make it, because when we try and teach people across the world what other markets are like, people have no imagination. So actually Meals Ready then got translated into God knows how many languages, got used all over the place. And it taught me 2 things. One is that there is an absolute, one, it taught me that I don't have the capacity to hot foot around with a film. It is not in my nature to actually do that. I don't know how to do that. I don't know how to call up people and say, I made a film on this. It's just not in me. So some of my friends will tease me and say, so is the secret out that the film is ready? Because I can be very open about many other things. I'm diffident about doing that. But it also taught me that, it's, for me, then it's enriching to know that a film is being used or has its organic channel that it will take. And that anything else you do becomes incidental. So the festival circuit it did, or the fact that we actually translated it into Hindi, dubbed it in Hindi. We didn't subtitle it. We dubbed it in, because we had a lot of agricultural friends, people who work with farmer groups. They were all like, just, who's going to use the subtitles? So we said, okay, you know what, we just dubbed it in Hindi and put it out and whatever. And we had enough money to do all of that. So, but after that, it's just become increased. And I'm talking mid-90s, 95, 96 I think was production, 95, 96 was production of Meals Ready. And then, we did a couple of films on education. And when I say we, up to that point, I was co-directing with my partner. From there on, I've been making films on my own. And when you said that there are very few people who will give you the kind of money you need, I'm not even sure who they are, to be quite honest. Unless you're working with an NGO already committed to the subject. actually don't know, when people say, where do you go for funding? I actually don't know where one goes for funding. So for instance, New Improve Delhi, I just self-funded. But it's an extremely complicated kind of thing. Then came along PSBT in about 2001, I think. 2000, 2001, somewhere along that time. And it was Prasar Bharati, it was an open call. Suddenly you didn't have to be part of a circuit. I mean, for me, that becomes the most exciting thing, right? But of course, you don't know what you're going to do, because at that point, it's first cycle of Doordarshan. You're like, okay, your own biases about Doordarshan are operating where they are. You feel you're too sophisticated for it, and is it your audience, and all this stuff. And I have to say, the first time when Holy Duels of Hola Mohalla was telecast, I was sitting at home and watching it. And I wanted to weep. I wanted to weep because I didn't have a sense of what the film meant in any real world. Because I was watching it with 5 films, but I could have watched a better telecast of it, a better broadcast of it, or projection of it. I had no idea what it meant to anybody else. I didn't understand what telecast meant. And I swear at that point I said, I'm never going to make another film for telecast, because it just goes poof into the air, and I don't know what it means. But over the years, for It's a Boy, I went to interview the principal of one of a college in Delhi. And he not only knew the film, he had got a pirated copy from Doordarshan in order to discuss issues that the film raised, and shown it in his college, without ever knowing I lived around the corner. And that is the power of it. Or when I do, so PSBT of course has terrible budgets. I mean, it has budgets when they say, why aren't you applying? You haven't applied for 3 cycles. I'm like, I cannot afford to, because I'm always forking out of my own thing. I have to do more work on something else. I have to write, I have to design, I have to make some other film to fund my, and then you're always having to work, with actually increasingly with less and less experienced talent. The talent you can afford on the same money this PSBT gives you has only slid down because it's 10 years and the budgets have barely moved. I appreciate what they're trying to do. They have given people a range of people an access to talk about issues, to make films, etc., that nobody else was giving. And some really good work has come out of it. A lot of mediocre work has come out of it. But tell me, what does not have a lot of mediocre work, right? The other reason to put up with the madness of working with low budgets of something like PSBT, and I'll come to the downside of it in a bit, is actually the fact that I feel that it's a state-run space. It is a mainstream space. And now it's no longer a Doordarshan space. They also telecast on NDTV, and all of that is going on. They're selling to all kinds of channels. The other thing is to make an intervention in a mainstream space, to bring in debates about things that don't get said. I think increasingly in a world where there's so much audiovisual content, everybody is rightfully a filmmaker. It is now like saying everybody can speak. There's no big deal. I think people like us who make films, we have to think about, why are we making this film? What are we bringing to the discourse? Is there anything you have to contribute? See, one is it can be just what you do. It can be how you earn money. It can be how I can do something else to earn money. It's too capital intensive. I mean, just politically speaking, it's too capital intensive. It's too emotionally exhausting. It's too physically exhausting. It's too complicated, in terms of using so much. Now the materiality of it has changed, but earlier it used to be that you would be dumped with 50 tapes, and each time you think of that, you think, why am I doing this? Do I have something particular to say? Am I bringing something to this discussion? Is it something I would not watch on television otherwise? Is this person a story who a TV feature would not feature? Why? Right? And then to try and think of, therefore, why I should make this film. I feel that interrogation is important, at least for somebody like me. I'm not placing myself above or beside or anything. It's just what I need to justify to myself why I make the film. So for me, then, putting certain kinds of arguments, certain kinds of articulation, certain kinds of positions, statements, debates in a mainstream space then become really important. Yeah? So for all these reasons, I find that whole telecast space now challenging. People come to a screening for many reasons. They like you, they hate you, they love the topic, they like the venue, it's en route to their favorite bar. I mean, there are 100 reasons, right? But something like a telecast becomes it has another life, it acquires different meaning. And I think there is something to be said for that. And I never thought of myself as somebody who would work so hard to sort of appropriate or acquire some mainstream space like that. But I think, as activists or whatever, as somebody who wants to make that thing, it's for me something that's important. The downside of this kind of money crazy is that it reflects the truth that actually nobody is interested in this kind of introspective work. An NDTV or Discovery, they don't want to buy it. They don't want to fund it. If you've made it, they'll give you a telecast right. So they will give you, you're really well off if they give you $60,000 for an hour. Seriously? What does it cost them to make their features? It doesn't matter. And they're like the space, and this is not particularly about NDTV. At one point, Asianet would telecast it for free, and you said thank you very much because somebody put it on air, right? And it's always going to be that struggle. And it's actually irrespective of what your political position, you can make fairly mainstream documentary and still be in the same trouble that one is. It's not because one is making a particular kind of film, right? And because one is not a particular kind of celebrity, it's not like one is doing crowdsourcing or crowdfunding or whatever, I mean, I think it's a great idea, but I think crowds also have to then decide what they really want to invest in. So but those are things to think about, in terms of how do you manage and, how do you also grow as a filmmaker? And I feel that now in the last couple of films where I'm working with such abysmal budgets, I feel like I'm not getting a chance to grow because there is no money to work with the kind of talent that I want to work with. And this is when I own my own edit machines, I do my own first cuts, I spend on a lot of other things. I tend to travel. I find it very hard to work within, like I keep saying, I don't have a 4 lakh budget and a 14 lakh. I don't have a 4 lakh brain and a 14 lakh brain and a 24 lakh brain. Within limits, I still have to do what I have to do. Those limits I'll set broadly thinking, this is how much money I have, but it gets to be a slightly crazy way to work. And I don't know what the out is of this, because I think there is a certain class of filmmaker that has access to a certain class of funding. And that is to speak of quality of the work they do. I'm not at all saying this is only about network. It is about the kind of work they do, it is about the access they have to it. It's about a whole lot of other political comfort with accessing money from that kind of body. So there's all kinds of complicated relationships. And I don't use words like co-option, etc. easily, because I don't think people do extremely significant work, well-funded. And sometime I think, one's going to have to figure out how to move to some other space where it's more supported, or how to simply say that, okay, this year I'm just going to make the money, next year I'm just going to make the films, next 2 years I will make the film. But that's also a position of privilege, right? That assumes you have some skills that can make that kind of money. It's not possible for everybody. I've always been totally control freaky about the edits. That's who I am. That's my turf. I can give camera people some latitude, but when I get to the edit machine, and that's why I decided I was just going to teach myself the skill instead of driving someone else crazy. So I pretty much reach final cuts on my own. And then I actually love just having a techie sitting there cleaning it up while I sit back and say, okay, this is working, this is not working. In terms of practice, I think it's made many things possible. It's not one as mystified, So all the interrogation I was saying that one goes through about why should one make it, etc. I feel it compels you to ask more questions now. Because it's like, okay, when you get out and shoot, there's a banality to that, and if everybody's doing it, then what are you trying to do? Not because you always have to be so different and so great, but just for yourself. You should know why you're doing something, right? But I think what it's allowed you to do, and for me, my personal moment of sort of understanding what this change in technology meant, of being able to edit non-linear, not on analog machines and edit digital, was the moment of remaking New Improved Delhi. I had a script in my head. I shot with friends. Everything was gratis. I did the first cut with a friend it was gratis, because by then I felt like I had cut too many films on my own. And I thought maybe I'm getting stuck in the way I do it. I thought I wanted a more technological answer. Somehow I was looking at a split screen, something. I still know what those images are, but somehow it didn't work. Okay? It didn't work. Silent Nights at FSA was coming up. It went. I got some good feedback, some silences. Anyway, then I thought, chalo, theek hai, ho gaya. I was like that about it. And then I broke my leg and I was lying in bed. And the ghost returned. I kept thinking to myself, and this is where I felt like, because unlike a lot of longer documentaries, this was a short 5-minute film. It was in my head scripted the way I used to script my TVCs. It had a very clear script. It was built around a video letter. The letter was very clear. And I just couldn't, it was I'm not affronting, it was sort of shaking my confidence in my relationship with the medium that I couldn't make it work. It was like some bug, it was like out there, it was out of focus, it was almost out of reach, but I knew something was there, you know? And I thought, what goes? You're sitting at home, the machine's at home. And this was like Premiere 4 or something. I tell you, if you jostled the audio a frame, it had to re-render. I would do this and then I would wait. And I couldn't twiddle my toe because it was broken, you know. And I think I had that immeasurable patience only because I was so crazed out about why it wasn't working, and because I was so stuck at home that I couldn't get out and do other things. I mean, I was doing other work. I'd made some, you know, it was a book launch and I'd done some film with it. I'd done all kinds of things, but it wasn't the usual rhythm of life. And then when it came together, I'm like, yes. That then said to me that, look, you can revisit, you can relearn, you can fix. For the first time, I realized the power of non-linear. Because until then, the 2 non-linear edits I had done, actually only one film, I had one film and then New Improved Delhi, was the first time I'd worked on non-linear, right? And one other thing I'd helped with. But I didn't really understand why my brain is still linear, right? I still tend to be like that. I still need to at least get a beginning, then I can do some other chunk. But I'm not very non-linear in my thinking. That sometimes happens when I'll be like, acha, just put that together kind of thing. But it doesn't really work for me. At least in each chunk there's a linearity. So there's a micro-linearity I'm working with. But for the first time I understood what it meant. I understood that you could erase and rewrite on, it's like a whiteboard. You could do that. You could think again, and you could, in that film, of course, I set myself a stipulation saying I would primarily work with the footage that I had. I wish I hadn't done that because there's something crucial missing in it. But it was the honesty I owed myself. I brought in one new element, and I said the other core footage I'm not going to. If I felt that was enough to shoot, also one I couldn't go out. It was partly that, but I think partly I just felt like saying with the same material, can the material mean something else? Yeah? So for me, it was a release. I began to understand how it is to edit. I was feeling very stifled saying, I can't figure this out maybe because I haven't studied film. You know, then when in doubt, I go back to, am I educated enough? Which I'm not, but that's, you know, it's my recourse to blaming it on something. But partly then it becomes this thing of actually saying that what is my grasp on the medium and can I play with it, you know? And so that was for me a turning point. In more recent times, it has been the fact that that I can go out and shoot. I don't like shooting. I'm not good at it. I don't have the kind of rigor that one needs because I feel I'm more the person who engages. And so I like to not worry about is something in focus and is the lighting right or is it changing? Is the person moving too much? And it's not something I enjoy doing. I enjoy some moments, but it's actually not what I enjoy doing. Which is strange because everyone now assumes that most people go out with the camera and shoot. Right? But I like someone else to be able to focus and really commit themselves to that while I do the tangential thinking that can only happen when you get out. Even if you've seen the location 100 times, even if you have some vague notions, but how it, you know, develops as material is something I'm not able to think that much with a camera in my hand. I'm getting slightly better, but like in really idiot-proof cameras. But it's sort of breaking down a bit, but I think it's not so much that. But it is the fact that if you want to go and shoot that one other thing, you can do it now. It was not a possibility when I started out. It was like, ho gaya, your tapes are locked, they're all on betas, and that's it. You can never go out and just hire another camera and do it for the day, right? So that way, the relationship with being able to think, rethink, work, I think for me that has changed a bit. You know, there's a lovely question people ask you. When you say you make first when you say films, yeah, I quickly say documentary films so that it's not doesn't seem glamorous. You know, because I can't bear the heartbreak that you watch in people's faces when they say, oh, acha documentary, acha theek hai." You know, then they tell you, oh, we watch Discovery and Nat Geo. Like, I don't make those kind of films either. You know, because that kind of descriptive film, I feel a lot of people make better than me. It's not very much what interests me. Not that, definitely not to make. I mean, not definitely not to make, but it doesn't interest me. It's not what I set out to do, that, oh, I should tell people that there is such a creature in the world. It's not what keeps me awake at night at all, you know. And it's a little difficult to understand what keeps me awake at night. Because then the next question they ask you is, Acha, you make documentaries, what issues? What issue do you make on? And I figure that there are people who have categories, right? There are people who make environmental films, ecological films. There are people who make films on gender. There are people who make films on development or on tribal issues. You know, there are people who have a certain, but for me, I think that just doesn't work. I mean, I see gender in agriculture. I mean, and I've had this debate with older definitions of what are women's film festivals. And then people would ask me, do you make feminist films? I'm like, yes. I think Meals Ready is a feminist film. It looks at what it means to be not just man and woman. It looks at what it means to be caste gendered. You know, I'm caste, you know, of a certain caste, of a certain class. And how these things intersect. How it's different for a Dalit woman who's mostly labor, as opposed to a Brahmin man who has a mid-sized, you know, land holding. If that is not feminism, I don't know what is. You know? So I've had these debates for ages, and it's funny because now these films are coming into, you know, women's studies conference, and I find it like super funny, you know. And I've always been saying to somebody recently, saying, let's have a session on what do we mean by films on women, or feminist films, or gender-centric films. What do we mean by that? Do we mean violence per se? Or do we mean violence and sexuality just because we're in the mid-2000 whatever, 10s or whatever it is? But beyond that, do we mean other things? Or does development become something else? Does ecology become something else? You know, whatever. So for me, things are sort of organically linked. So whether I'm making a film on agriculture, whether I'm making one on the Khalsa tradition and Hola Mohalla, for me, gender is something that's just organic to it. It is one of the many questions you have to ask, right? Or one of the many things you have to explore. So for me, gender is not necessarily something I just make a film on. So, you know, the film on sex determination is about the only one. And it's not the one I'm most comfortable with in terms of its form or what it says, because I feel it sort of still looks at it somewhat in a box. Not that it's wrong, but I'm just saying for me, it is one of my films. It's not like, I wouldn't say like, this is it, this is what I do. What I do, I mean, my own political work looks at communalism, looks at conflict, looks at state power, looks at, you know, lots of things. So my films look at all these things, you know. So if I made a film on, you know, I think post-Gujarat, I felt the need to go back to Ayodhya. Post the Gujarat violence. You know, everyone has a turning point in their life. For many people who are older than me, I think Babri Masjid was the turning point, where you had a deep consciousness of your being Hindu, of your being of your own caste, of your majoritarian power, whether or not you were majoritarian by nature, all of that. But for me, honestly, although I was very active at that time, I didn't feel that particular thing. I felt many other things. But Gujarat made me aware of that. Going to do relief work, going to, you know, do work on that, made me deeply conscious of how the kind of power and security I have as a Hindu woman, and possibly as a Hindu upper caste woman, but definitely as a Hindu woman. The fact that I don't have to think to have to fake my name. I don't have to wear a bindi. I can afford to be subversive because when I open my mouth, my language is Hindu Hindi. I'm from Lucknow. I could have well had an Urdu zuban. I don't. I have a Hindustani zuban. Immediately, I don't have to think. The fact that I don't have to think in Ahmedabad that is still sputtering with violence made me like, you know, there's just like so many things it taught me. And I started, you know, and the whole context in like something like Gujarat was, you're wondering what makes somebody good or bad. The same person who is, you know, raped and killed or at least looted his neighbor, somebody thinks of as a good father, a sweet husband, whatever, nice brother, a genteel man, a good man in the mandir. There's something totally spooky about all this. So I started looking at what does it mean to be in sites of conflict. So, so those kind of tensions now. I mean, I've done films on food and economy, on the political economy of food, on education, trying to look at it from children's perspective, community and teachers' perspectives. I've done stuff on some cultural questions around minority communities. I've done some stuff on dance and stuff, which has been supremely liberating and fun. I mean, challenging visually, etc., but not in this kind of thing. Development. But again, that thing of what do you make visible, what is not visible. So even New Improved Delhi was made in the context where there was stuff on television, but why was it not speaking to people like us? So it was a film meant for people like us, who are benefiting, so-called, by the slum moving away from our locality. For us to start thinking about, but what is happening there, really? What is their right to a space as opposed to our right to a space? We are tenants with more rights to space than they are as owners of pattas in the slum. So it was talking to people like us. So actually that's the thing, it shifts depending on what's happening. But I realize that now more and more that I keep looking at these points of what do we see and what do we not see. So in Ayodhya, it was that what does it mean to be a person in Ayodhya? What does Ayodhya mean actually? How real is it? Because when you say Ayodhya, there's some images and they're mostly car sevaks and something in demolition and but what is a real place? And I had been to Ayodhya in the early 80s before all of this. I had been part of endless battles on religion with my mother, who is a good believer and insists I now make her feel guilty for being one, which I don't intend to, right? But you have to introspect some of these questions, right? So I realized I move in terms of, the core concern is sort of the same. So for me, like the food on film and the politics around film and identity and community and family and how we define ourselves through our food habits and food practices is for me an extension of the Ayodhya film. It's trying to bring conflict closer and closer. So if in Ayodhya I was looking at what was the local investment? What did it mean to be 12-year-old Hindu boy in Ayodhya when the car sevaks were coming? How sexy was it? You're living in a small town, there are all these charged people coming, there's all this media. Come on, are you going to vilify that kid all his life? Or are you going to understand that it's like, for us it might be like another kind of march, or the pride might mean that to somebody. But scarily enough, the car seva does mean that to somebody. How does he reflect on it now? But what do the same car sevaks mean to a 14-year-old girl who might be Muslim growing up there? What did it mean to a devout Hindu who was part of the VHP camps, but whose children have had to deal with the drunken security guards all their lives? They have never known another life until they got married and left. These are extremely complex things. Conflict plays itself out in a real life in very many nuanced, smaller ways. And for me, somehow I feel like it's important to see that. So then when I started looking, even I'm trying to see what, so there you're looking at a fairly sharp religious divide, right? The Hindu-Muslim sort of dichotomy and what it means. Sort of, in a way, the caste question, which played itself out in Ayodhya, has never become strong enough, not even in my film. I tried, but it never came to have its own body in that film. So when you start looking further and further, and I'm trying to think, okay, but where else does it actually, how do we mark out these territories of who is not us? Of course it's religion, of course it's region, of course it's culture, whatever that means, which is a mix of all of this. Of course it's class, it's many things. And as over the years, and this didn't happen like immediately after, it happened a few years later, I found myself thinking more and more about, and I think with the explosion of all this talk about food, right? Everyone's into food. Half my research was done by being in social gatherings and I'd say, what are you making a film on? I'd say on food, and then everyone else would start expounding. I would just stop and just listen because everyone knew what the film was going to be about and I didn't. I was still exploring what it was going to be about, how I was going to get into exploring it. And food practices actually often are basic to everybody. And they do these combinations. Hyderabadi Muslim might eat very differently from a Hyderabadi Hindu, but will definitely eat differently from a Tamil Muslim. There is something else that binds You know, these things. There are other interconnections of cultural connection that you look at differently. And so actually in the food film, I didn't look at Hindu-Muslim at all. Muslims are glaringly missing by the obvious. Because I just felt sometimes that just overpowers that debate. So it's immediately about Hindu-Muslim or baat khatam ho gayi. But I felt that the whole thing of looking at practice, and we need to connect these things to not just individual choice. The fact that I like, a bright pink and a saffron as colors is not divorced from the fact that I grew up in a Hindu household with a certain kind of look of a puja space. Whether the fact that I'm a non-believer is of no relevance in that discussion. You know, because there's a cultural absorption, right? You're a cultural Hindu whether you like it or not. And then either you deculture yourself and absorb others and open your cultural mind and soul out, but you are culturally brought up some way. And very few people are brought up in truly multicultural, secular homes, secular in the really wider sense of multi-religious homes. And in any case, then you'll still have a name and you'll still have a grandmother, all that. So for me, food practice became something through which I could look at how closely identities of us and them get defined through something like a very everyday practice. We all have a thing of when I go home, whether it's your mother or not, or even if when you grow up and you're going home after a long time, you have a notion of what you want to eat, right? You have a notion of what you eat as a family, what you eat when you're with your larger family, what you don't eat. Who doesn't eat what you eat? We do have a thing of what is not us. And that then is not a personal, it's not only about choice and, oh me and you and I eat differently. But the fact that it has a bearing on our definitions of belonging and unbelonging. So where my community ends and where yours begins. So it is family, it is community, it is nation, whether we like it or not. And our notions of nation are also bound, among other things, by the way we eat. We have a notion that Indians don't eat this. We're each talking about someone else. We're each talking about a set of people. And then there is a dominant notion that Indians are Hindus, Hindus are non-meat eating, people. That actually is not the truth for the majority of the population. But that is what Gandhi's brand of nationalism did, right? A sort of predominantly Hindu nationalism did. So for me, then that becomes linked, whether it's the Nagas who are not seen, Nagas or Northeasterners who are not seen as Indian, or the fact that, you can be in Bangalore and not feel like you're part of India, or definitely in Delhi you don't think Bangalore or Kerala or Karnataka or whatever that they are part of. That's not in your notion of India, right? And what is the bearing of all of this? How do these things connect? How do our everyday practices, or if you're of a certain caste for certain, what you eat is definitely defined by you. So, NRIs will say that if you live in Thailand, people will say your skin smells of milk, and they find it very offensive that someone should say that. But we live like that, right? So, for me, to come back to the question of, what do I work on? I work on things that are broadly interconnected in terms of both a discrimination from the outside, but also where do we feed into this? There is an Vani, or there is today a Modi, or there is that, but there is us who play into that. So where do we find that connect?